But yeah, my name's Benjamin Yoder. I'm with a YouTube channel called One Controller Port. I like to cover kind of like obscure and underappreciated games. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I like to look at games from a different angle a lot of times and take different perspectives. So kind of in that same vein today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about staying positive while buying old games on a budget. Now, I think probably anyone in here, I don't need to tell you that old retro video games have gotten pretty expensive. I feel like the last 10 years, things really started to accelerate. And then you had a little spike in 2020 as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing to some degree. Like if people are involved in the hobby and that's increasing demand, increasing prices, like I'm all happy if more people are involved with like old video games and like interested in video game history, personally at least. But that doesn't change the fact that that like has an effect on the market, right? And so I definitely noticed over the years that like the friends I had that were going out and shopping for games regularly were starting to have more and more of like negative experiences. It became more and more price focused and things like that. And I just personally felt I was not being affected nearly as much as other people in two different ways. One is just like general sentiment going out. When I was going out shopping for games, I was still pretty positive about what I was going out and buying. Like I was very happy with the games I was getting. And also like in terms of budget, I have spent maybe the last 20 years of my life spending about $5 to $10 most used video games, and that's still mostly what I pay for video games. You know, obviously there's exceptions, but most of the time that's my general average price. So I'm hoping today some of the things I can offer you will help you the next time you guys go out shopping, and if not save money, at least make your experience a little bit more positive, and so you'll have a more fun time shopping rather than, you know, basically quitting the hobby as a whole. I definitely saw like a lot of YouTube videos out there last year that were like, I'm done collecting and it's over, the prices are too high kind of thing. So what I want to start with though, first and foremost, is just what today's not going to be about. There's three things I don't really want to talk that much about, and it's because it is kind of common advice out there. One is we're not really going to talk a lot about deal hunting. So, you know, going out to the swap meet at super early in the morning, I don't want to do that. And I imagine most of you guys don't want to do that. I'm not going to talk about regional price variation. So this idea that like, hey, you know, maybe I want a PS1 copy of Final Fantasy VII and the Japanese copy is like 5 times cheaper. So I'm going to import that and put that on my shelf instead. Not going to talk about that really today. And also, we're not going to talk about game price speculation. So I really think in 5 years, Japanese Xbox 360 horror games are going to be the most expensive thing. So I'm going to buy now so I get in now so I don't have to worry about that later kind of thing, right? These are not bad pieces of advice. I use these to some extent myself, and I think they should be something you should consider if you're out shopping for games. I just think that they often aren't like the greatest backbone for going out and purchasing things because it can be really inconsistent in the results you have kind of thing. So I feel like this kind of leads back to a negative like space that you end up with. Like inherently deals have a low success rate. You know, if you're going out there, you're looking for that one, you know, price tag that has been updated in 5 years from the shopkeeper. You save that $15, you get that quick high, right? And then it's like, oh yeah, I saved 15 bucks. And then it's kind of right back to where you were. And then the longer it goes without finding a deal, you're kind of right back to where you started. You're like, it's going out and shopping, going out early to the swap meets, and I'm just not finding anything kind of thing, right? There's also kind of the uncontrollable market forces part of this. So if that Japanese copy of Final Fantasy VII suddenly starts shooting up in price, then all of a sudden you're right back to where you started, where both copies are just in an unaffordable space for you. And then lastly, also, there's a frustration without payoff. So you invest in all those Japanese Xbox 360 horror games, and for some reason the market doesn't go the way you thought it would. And you may be perfectly happy, like at least I have those games, right? If I'm here to play and enjoy these games, doesn't matter what the price is in the future. But then you like look at this other space that you're like, oh, I didn't think these games were going to go up. And then those inevitably were the ones that went up, right? And then you feel like they have this opportunity cost that you lost kind of thing because I invested in this space rather than that space kind of thing. So again, not bad things you should do, but I just think they're not great ways to kind of deal with, you know, feeling negative about shopping for games once you're going out there. So I want to really stress today, though, that the things I'm talking about are my personal approaches. We all buy games for different reasons. We all enjoy games for different reasons. We all, play games for different reasons, things like that too, right? So, what you're looking to buy and things like that is going to change how you shop for games in a lot of ways. Just depends on the market you're in, kind of thing. And the advice I have here today is very focused on things that I have found that work for me. And I'm kind of, I'd say, a little off kilter a little bit when it comes to games a bit. I generally like to learn more about games rather than I care about like if I had the greatest experience. So sometimes I'm like, oh, this game wasn't very fun, but it does all these like really cool things. And some people I think focus more on like atmosphere in games and things like that, right? Some people are pure fun. Some people are about competitive games. Some people just like weird stuff, and they're like, I just want something to really catch me off guard, kind of thing. So I think as I go through these pieces of advice today, you'll see where my personal, tastes kind of fall into this kind of space. So you may need to adapt some of these things to your own taste and how you approach buying games as well. But it's at least something worth thinking about, I think. So today I'm going to be asking you to do a few things. One is that we're going to kind of rethink a game's value a little bit. We're also going to be rethinking kind of the types of games you pursue, or at least expanding the range of games you pursue. There's also a little bit of a post-purchase process I think that's kind of worth talking about too, and that's kind of rethinking how you approach the games themselves once you actually buy them. And then finally, how you react to being priced out. Because the reality is that like I can't help you get a cheap copy of, Panzer Dragoon Saga or anything like that, right? There's just no way that's really happening. So what do you do when you're in that situation? And how do you turn that kind of like negative energy that you're like, I'm going to go on Twitter and tweet this picture of like some game store's like $800 copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga and say, I hate retro game collecting. How to put that into something a little more positive and maybe the money that you would have been willing to spend on it in a place that's a little more positive too. Now, the first piece of advice I have for you guys today is something that I think most people can do unless you're in like a very particular mindset with gaming, and that is really to avoid investment shopping. I'm not telling you what you should do for your retirement plans. I am not saying whether video games should be a part of that or not. That's your own business and not any of mine. Personally, I just do not like thinking of monetary gain when I'm shopping though. I really go out of my way to avoid like looking at a game and saying, what is this going to be worth in 5 to 10 years, something like that. What I'm trying to do more than anything is really focus on what I'm paying is going to be the price of what I think it's worth to play. Or in some cases, just try. In some cases, as you'll see here as I go deeper into like how I actually find games. But I really want to focus on that price being what I think it's worth to actually play that game. And how I do that in like the easiest way possible is basically any video game I purchase, I look at it and say, as soon as I own this video game, it is now valueless. I don't care how expensive it was, it is now worth $0. Obviously, realistically, it's not. And if you're in a situation where you need to sell your games, get as much value as you need out of it, right? But in the case of just like enjoying the hobby of like going out and buying these things, I really try to remove that aspect of it because I just think if you're focusing more on what you're going to pay to play a game, there's not as much things in the market that can kind of take that away from you. So like say for example, you get a deal on something, right? And there's like an HD remake of it, and then that deal price, or the game's price like shoots down or something like that, right? Then that short-term gain you got from the deal is then something that's like lost on you. It actually becomes a negative thing at that point. So like, I thought I got, some awesome deal out of this, and now the market has changed, and now I'm unhappy about it. But if you're paying what you think it's worth to play it, at least that experience was like connected to that amount of money that you actually spent on it, kind of thing. Unfortunately, I think a big part of this too is like being willing to pass up on deals as well. Like I definitely run into times where I'm like, oh, this is like a great price for this game, but it's still not the price I'm willing to pay for it. Because again, once you buy it, it kind of puts you at risk that like you might lose for that initial hit of like, I got a deal, you might lose that to some changes in the market, maybe putting the price lower for that particular game kind of thing. Now, how effective this is if you are buying like $80 to $100 video games every time you're going out and shopping, like individual games, I don't know. I am mostly somebody who makes a lot of low-cost bets. So I like to go out there and try to find titles I don't know much about and really learn about them. So if you're going after like known hits, especially, beloved series like Pokemon or Mario, Mario's kind of, it depends on the game. Or just like, even if like a YouTuber made like a video about a hidden gem and they're like, oh, I have 500,000 subscribers and now this game's like 8 times worth what it used to be kind of thing. Those kind of games are just really expensive. And for the most part, I just kind of put blinders on and just like, do not look at them. I'm like, all right, this is out of my range. That game no longer is a thing that I'm looking to actually purchase kind of thing. So what I usually do when I'm going out and shopping is I really focus on window shopping for cheap games. So, you guys are in Portland here. I assume most of you are from Portland here, maybe, I don't know. I'm from Las Vegas. And so we have decent amount of game shops as well. And so going and purchasing games at like a game shop is really nice because it kind of limits the scope of games that you have to choose from kind of thing. And when you're buying cheaper games, you don't know what you're looking at kind of thing. When you're looking at the shelves, you don't want to be pulling every Mario game off the shelf, right? You want to be pulling off games you don't know about. Like, what is Battle Rage for the Wii? I don't know what Battle Rage for the Wii is. I'm going to pick it up and look at the back of this box, though. And sometimes you can find some really interesting stuff that way. But if you don't have like a game shop near you that kind of restricts that stock down to let it like make it be easier for you to kind of window shop, I think online shopping, you can kind of artificially restrict the types of games you're looking at. I think one of the easiest ways you can do this is by focusing on one seller online. So obviously if you don't have like an ongoing seller, I'm not saying like, commit to one random person that you don't know. But, when you're out shopping for games on the internet, just go on like, if you purchased something on eBay recently, go back and look at who sold it to you and see if they stock games normally. Just kind of focus on what they have and focus on making choices between what they have in stock, essentially. Now, most people in the game collecting space will say, no, don't do this. And I think there's a very good reason why you should not do this, or a very good There's an approach that a lot of people take with this that I think puts you in a really bad spot. And so I think it's really important that you make a connection with your game. So a lot of people, when they take this approach, they're like, I'm going to buy this game because it is cheap. That is the reason I'm buying this video game. So, it's $1. It literally takes me more time to think about this rather than purchase it. I'll figure out if I even care about it later. I'm just going to buy it right now kind of thing. Or maybe you're buying like a bundle of games, like 50 PS2 games in a box, and like, well, it's $50. I might as well, it's only more, like all of them are going to be worth at least more than $1 kind of thing. I think that really puts you in a position where the more and more of these purchases you make that are focused on the fact that I got this cheap, the more and more just like stuff you end up with. And it's like, I don't care about any of this stuff. I don't know what any of this is. I don't know why I have this other than I got a deal. And I think that's like one of the worst places you can be in if you take this approach. So I think making connection with every game you buy is really important. And it doesn't have to be like, you have to love the game outright from the second you first look at it. A lot of times for me, it's just like, I think this genre is an interesting genre and I want to check this game out kind of thing when I look at the box, right? Artistically, it does something interesting, or maybe it has like a gimmick. There's like this Wii racing game that has like 8-player split screen support. And dear God, if I could get 8 people together to play it, I would definitely buy it and just check it out and be like, what is this about? But I can't, so I'm going to not buy that. But those kind of like weird little gimmicks, I think, are really interesting things to kind of like, I'm curious about this. How does this game handle this problem kind of thing, right? Of putting 8 players on a single screen in a like behind the back racing game kind of thing. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing too, if you don't have anything in particular in mind, is like publisher can be like a super easy thing. Like I've definitely just picked up games to the sole fact that like Capcom's on the front. I don't know what this video game is. Crimson Tears for the PS2. Anyone here know what that is? I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna try it out and see if it's cool. so I play it, and it's pretty all right. And like some of the values that the game has is similar to other Capcom games. So even though it's not something that's like this big release or something like that, I kind of appreciate it from the like sense of like I'm looking at this as like a Capcom game and like what they're doing with this, and it's pretty nice. So something as simple as the publisher can be like something that you make a connection with. But the real goal is to make sure when you go home, and inevitably if you guys are like me and you have way too many video games, you put that thing on the shelf, you're like 4 years from now I'll get to this. You want to be able to look at that game and be like, hey, I got this because, not I got this because it was $1. You want to be able to say why you got that video game, essentially. So if you are taking this kind of window shopping approach, it is something that if you are very narrowly focused on a particular thing, I think it's going to be really hard for you to find all that much that's interesting. If you're like a shoot 'em up fan, or if you're like a, only focused on the Sega Saturn, and that's like your sole focus, right? I don't know if you're going to be able to find much that like people haven't already perused over. The stuff that's like actually good, people are going to actually, it's going to be worth something because most people have looked at that within your like player space. So I think it's really important to make sure you keep a really expanded range of interests. Really move away from one focus. And there's a couple of reasons why I think you should do this. One, I think like just from like for me personally, I just really like to understand games and understand different approaches to games and things like that. So I like to look at as many genres as possible. But the other thing is this really kind of protects you from the market to some extent. So I was a huge Nintendo GameCube fan. I love the GameCube. Those prices shot up and I was like, this is not a market for me anymore. Thank you, goodbye. So I decided to leave that market, but I had so many other platforms I could go to. I was like a huge fan of the Wii. I love PlayStation games. Like I just had so many different, really deep libraries to explore at that point. So if you are focused on that one thing, any one change in the market, like if you're a From Software fan and Dark Souls series takes off, like I'm sorry, that market just gets really bad. And that's what you focus on, then it's just a bad market to be in at that point, right? So there's not a lot you can do if you're really focused on that singular market. I think systems with really deep libraries are great because usually they really focus on a wide target audience. So inevitably, you're going to find something within those libraries that will be of interest to you. So even if you are like, I'm a Sega Saturn fan through and through, maybe invest in the PlayStation library. A lot of the developers were going between those two consoles. A lot of the design philosophies between those games were very similar in a lot of ways. And personally, like if you can, get out of the same generation too, because a lot of the price is driven by like nostalgia, right? And so if people are like, I was 10 when this came out and now I'm 25 and I have way too much money to spend, so I'm going to spend it on all this other stuff, all these games in this particular release window, all those prices are going to go up. So as much as you can expand, I think the better. And I also think it can be really important to try new and unfamiliar games. If you're somebody coming from like a very traditional gaming background, like if you're a big Nintendo fan or something like that, you're going to be around a lot of people who are collecting in that from your kind of value set as being a Nintendo fan, right? And so sometimes I think you can reach out and try something just different. Again, make a connection to what you're trying, so don't just buy something randomly, but maybe take a risk on something that really is unfamiliar to you and see if it's something that you'll love. My favorite example for this for myself is a game called Wii Ski. This is a Nintendo Wii, I guess, casual ski game. And I love the Wii. I have no interest in skiing. I'm like, I don't care. Also, the Wii has kind of a image of being the shovelware console, right? And visually looking at this, I'm like, this looks questionable, maybe like a mini game collection of skiing games. And yeah, I just don't know. But two things. One, the balance board gimmick. I was like, oh yeah, balance board, a skiing game. That might be kind of cool. Unfortunately, I lost my balance board before I could even play it, so rest in peace. But the other thing was Bandai Namco published this. And I was like, Bandai Namco, they're reasonable. Like, I expect that they probably know what they're investing in, so maybe it's worth looking at kind of thing. So I did pick it up as a hot $1, so, very cheap risk at the very least. And yeah, I mean, it is a skiing game for sure. And you kind of ski down this mountain, and there's like other people skiing with you. But the cool thing is like, it's a ski vacation game. So it's like all these people aren't racing against you. They're just on the mountain just having a good time. And you can go around and do like quests and things like that. And there's like this really cute story where you like help people have a wedding and stuff. And it's like got a good atmosphere, like, fireworks going off at night, all these like lights. And there's like Bandai Namco music blaring over the speakers, like really distorted, like it's coming out of like a big boombox above you kind of thing. And boy, is this one of my favorite Wii games ever. And I'm like, I had no reason to pick this game up, but I love this. And this is great. And I ended up playing a bunch of like other family, Namco Bandai like family sports game after this. And none of them have ever quite met the Wii Ski Bar, but they're still cool. And it like gave me places to explore a little bit more. And so I think if you kind of shoot yourself out somewhere where nobody else is really looking, sometimes you can find like a little cool space for yourself to kind of explore around on your own. and find, again, cheap stuff that nobody really cares about. On the bright side, Wii Ski actually sold pretty dang well, so there's a lot of copies of them. But it was pretty popular for, I think, a particular young audience at the time. So I'm curious if, like, at some point there'll be like some influx of like big Wii Ski fans, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm ready to talk to you guys when you get old enough for that. So, but not every game's gonna be a Wii Ski, unfortunately. Most of these games are gonna have some problems, and you're gonna have to deal with those. And again, fortunately, I'm somebody who can put up with a lot of that myself. I know not for everybody that's something that you can do. So I will say, I do think there are ways you can kind of, give a game more chance that you normally would, kind of thing. I think a lot of people put up a wall immediately when they play a game, and they like run into these pain points, right? They're like, oh, I don't like how the movement works. I don't understand how this mechanic works. I don't understand, this or that about the game. And like, I put it in for 5 to 10 minutes, or 5 minutes to an hour, or something like that. And, we all have limited time, so I totally understand of like, hey, this is my decision point, and I'm done, kind of thing. But I think you can usually get a little bit more out of a game if you just take a step back and think about the mechanics a little bit more. Like after you finish playing, just like take some time to be like, well, like how does this actual mechanic work? What are the components of this mechanic? Or like with movement, like how does movement work in this game? And what movement options do you have? Maybe I'm approaching this game from like a bad spot, kind of thing, right? I have like this understanding, especially with like old games, like I have this understanding of how games work, and maybe this game's coming from like a different understanding. That's a hard thing to do, I think, for a lot of people. I've gotten to the point that I can do that pretty easily myself. But I think one of the easiest ways you can kind of go about this is just do some reading online real quick. Like go look at some positive impressions of a game and see if you can understand like what approach they took to the game and exactly, what they're like about that game. And you might be able to find that those pain points that you had weren't so much like actual problems with the game as it was how you were actually approaching the game may not necessarily have been the right way to approach it, kind of thing. Or you can just like read into like, I think one of the things I do a lot, honestly, like games that don't explain their mechanics well, but some fan on a Wikipedia like explained it miraculously beautifully. And so, obviously it's on the game to explain its mechanics, but if you can just go and read somebody else's explanation of it, then you're like, okay, cool, I'm good. Now you can play the rest of the game and be perfectly fine, kind of thing. Now, I know I'm asking a lot of you guys in terms of just like these kind of guided shots in the dark of like, yeah, just try out these cool games you see on the shelf. Maybe some of them are pretty cool, kind of thing. I'm going to ask you guys to go a little bit further in the deep end with me. Hey, I love importing video games. I think it's a great experience. Again, we're not talking about like regional price variation with this. Platforms have really extensive libraries in other regions, Japan specifically, that often doesn't get localized. And some of those imports are expensive because, I think the reality is like when a lot of people go shopping online for imports, they focus solely on like accessibility. So they look at the game. I feel like you can make a chart of like, likelihood that you can punch to finish a game to the price of the game, kind of thing. And so people go and they shop online for these games that look super, super accessible, and that's it. They don't look at anything else. Anything else that has like Japanese text on the screen, it's like that might as well be like a romantic adventure novel with 99% text and all talking heads, kind of thing. But there's so many games kind of like in between, kind of thing. And so I think it's really important to kind of leave your comfort zone a little bit when you're importing. Again, we're making low cost bets here. So I'll get into like some things about like how to actually get import games fairly cheap. But, leave your comfort zone a little bit. Like, look for something maybe in a genre you're familiar with. So maybe like, oh, I have some familiarity with how this kind of game works, kind of thing. But don't just don't get too scared by the Japanese text on screen. And if you don't end up being able to finish it, again, since it's a low cost bet, at the end of the day, I don't think it's like a huge deal. And again, make a connection with the game you're importing. Don't just import random garbage. But I think you can really find some really cool, cheap stuff this way. I found a lot of like there's like some Zelda-style PS1 games that like Sony put out like first party. It's called Tiny Bullets is the one I'm thinking of specifically. Little like kid with a slingshot, and it's just like a Zelda game. And it controls a little weird. It's kind of like Tomb Raider in how it controls, but like otherwise, it's a really cool game. It's really nice, and it's like $5 because nobody cares about it. So it's very cool. I think you should also try a lot of different types of games as well. Don't just focus on one particular approach of like, I think I can approach this because the menus look accessible. I think I can approach this because of, it looks like there's a lot of voice acting or things like that. Try a lot of different things to kind of figure out, what things work best for you to importing. And the more time you spend on importing games, the more you'll kind of rein in exactly what you think will work for you, kind of thing. You can kind of preemptively figure this stuff out, but it's a larger conversation to today. So I just will say, I on my YouTube channel, I do have a playing Japanese games without knowing the language panel I did earlier this year at Sin City Anime Expo, no, Level Up Expo in Las Vegas. So at the end of the presentation, I do have cards up here if you want to grab that card and go look at that later if you want. So now, back to Japanese game. Importing Japanese games can be very expensive. You don't want to import single games usually. So I know I said don't bulk buy games earlier, but in the case of Japanese games, it can be very helpful. If you are shipping one game, it can be like $20 to $30 depending on where you're buying it from and things like that. So if you buy games in bulk, it's usually a little bit better. However, I think the best way you can do this is buying from one seller. So we mentioned earlier, with one seller, it's really nice because you can narrow down the catalog of games you're actually reviewing, and that's also true for import games. But the bigger thing is that some of them will let you put everything in one box and ship it off. So yeah, it might be $20 to $30, but at the same time, if you're buying like, 10 to 15 games at a time, then that, significantly reduces down that cost. There's different sites that let you do this. I'm going to shill one in particular, which is Japan Retro Direct. I am not sponsored by them, but I have been shopping with him for like 12 years now at this point. So you can view that as kind of like a loyalty or a bias. I'll leave that up to you, depending on what you feel about that. But there's just a dude that was like moved to Japan essentially, and he just likes looking at games and buying games and things like that, and he just started selling them on his website. So he keeps a really interesting variety of imports. He doesn't really focus on just the big name titles. He just kind of finds things that look cool, and then he'll play them a little bit and then put them up on his website if he thinks it's something that's worth for people to look at. He does do like the regional pricing variation, so if you do want to get, I got like a cheap copy of Kirby Tilt and Tumble from Japan recently, so if you do want to do that too, especially if you're trying to fill out a box of games, that's something I kind of intermingle in there. But it's just like a really interesting set of games, and because a lot of these titles are things that are not things that people are looking at, most of them are very, very cheap. They're definitely much closer to Japanese shelf prices. When you're buying on eBay, it's really dangerous because some sellers really upcharge the price. And again, I know this guy, so don't necessarily take my word as like 100% unbiased. But when I was in Japan, the prices looked about right to what he was charging for them, from as far as I could tell, essentially. And then he also gives some advice on playability. So if you look at the descriptions of games, he'll let you know, hey, this game is super easy if you don't know any Japanese. Or say, hey, this game might need a guide. And I think he will link the guide too if he knows there's a guide out there for the game, kind of thing. So anyways, again, not sponsored, but there's my little plug for him. Again, I do have little cards for him up here as well, my bootleg cards for him. So if you want some bootleg QR codes, there you go. The URL is on there too as well. So you don't have to, scan that QR code if you're uncomfortable with doing that. So there are some ways you can kind of like narrow down the games you're looking at and try to get some more reliability. And I think one of the easiest ways you can do that is, find your own niche. So, if you are buying games and enjoying them, like find the games you like and look for other connections to other games. And I mean more than just like the publisher in this case, right? Don't just look for like, oh, Capcom's connected to this game I like. Like sometimes you can really dig into like the credits for a game. So if you go to like the website mobygames.com, they'll have like a lot of credits listings for games. And say you play an RPG and you're like, I really enjoy the battle system for this RPG. Maybe I don't enjoy other parts of this game, but the battle system's cool at least. You can like look at the battle system designer and then like go and see the history of other games he's worked on. Sometimes they've only worked on that series, so it's like, okay, cool enough. That's what I expected. But other times they hop around between companies, they work on other games. And so it kind of creates a web of games that you like become more aware of. Like, I want to kind of explore this space, and you get these other titles you can look at, and you have some reliability of like, I'm probably going to like the battle system in this game kind of thing, right? And so you can do that with a variety of things, but that's one of the ones I do is like JRPG battle systems. I try to figure out who worked on what with it and connect to other games that I might be interested in. It is good to get off the beaten path with this stuff though. Like if you're like, man, I really love Metal Gear Solid, man, Hideo Kojima, look, a lot of people love Hideo Kojima. And if you're like, I want to get Snatcher for the PC-98 or something, like, okay, that's going to cost you some money kind of thing. So again, if you can get off the beaten path, that helps you. And this kind of goes with like, making those kind of new unfamiliar bets I mentioned earlier. If you are jumping into these kind of random games that nobody else is looking at, you can start finding connections there as well. My personal favorite connection is it's actually one of the very first games I imported. It's a title called Blue Breaker Burst 2. This does not want to play, there we go. It is a 3D fighting game for the PS1. I was like, 3D fighting game, super easy. I can import that, very accessibility mindset. I was very wrong about this game. It is very story heavy with lots of characters and a overworld map that has time restrictions on you getting to certain places, or else you will lose and have to start your entire save all over again. I 100%ed it somehow, but I did. I got there. But I love this game. Like, it's not very good, but I adore it. And the developer of this game is a company called Hunex. And Hunex started making like TurboGrafx games in 1993. I think Magical is like a well-ish known TurboGrafx game at least. I'm not a TurboGrafx fan, I will say, so I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's somewhat well known. And then they really got into like, relationship RPG kind of stuff, right? So in the modern day, like maybe like more of a Persona kind of thing, maybe around more contemporary, like Sakura Tyson kind of thing. So they really got into that, and they were like, oh, you know what, let's just go all romance. And then they just started making Bishoujo games, so, like dating games where you're like one guy dating like or you can date one of 6 girls at like a school kind of thing. And then at some point they went bankrupt, which was not great. And then so they're like, we desperately need money. And they started making simple series games, which are like super budget PS2. Well, there's for a bunch of different platforms, but PS2 is the one they mainly focus on. Super budget games like Love Smash Tennis, and like they made like 50 of these. There's so many. And then they got into like games for girls at some point. They're like, hey, yeah, rhythm dress-up games, cool. And then they like really focused on that for a while. And then they got like otome games, so like, the opposite of Bishoujo games, got girl dating 6 other guys at a school. And then otome games were very successful for them, so they just kept making otome games. And that is still what they do today. So it's like this really fascinating journey that they've been on. And then like even funner of all this is like there's this game on the Switch called like, I think it's called like House of Fata Morgana or something like that. And if you don't know what this is the 3rd highest rated game on the Switch for Metacritic. And this is, so yeah, it's like right alongside Nintendo, Breath of the Wild and Mario. And then there's like, yeah, House of Fata Morgana. And then Hunex is listed as the developer. And I'm like, all right, that's like something to wake up to one day after like 10 years of following this company. Now, I want to be clear, they did not actually make this video game, they ported it. So they're really into porting stuff like from PC to console as well. So that's another big thing. But it is just kind of one of those fun things of like waking up to that and just being like, why is Hunex on the top 3 Switch games for Metacritic of all companies? So it's really exciting. But yeah, they've made, if not over 100 or hundreds of games, at least over 100 games. So like I have a whole place for me for video games to search from for these guys, and it's like most of them are super cheap because nobody cares. The TurboGrafx stuff is a little more expensive, but I'm like, whatever. I got like 150 other Hunex games I got to look at before I need to worry about that part of it. So anyways, but I think with searching for games, I think a lot of it is just like trying to expand your horizons and things like that, and really try to look in places that most other people wouldn't be looking, and that can really help you. But it does really require keeping an open mind. Now, unfortunately, the reality is that some of the games we like are just really, really expensive. There's not a lot you can do about it, right? They're just pricey. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about, what you can do about like, putting some of that negative energy from like, this game's so expensive into a place that's like, actually, I feel kind of okay with what I have done with that energy and like the money that I would have spent kind of thing. So, but before I get into that, first, I think we need to, talk a little bit about, priorities a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, we all buy video games for different reasons, right? Some people it's very nostalgic, some people it's collector. There's a lot of different reasons why we all buy video games. I think the one kernel of hope I have between all of us is that like the game experience is what matters the absolute most, right? That disc on the shelf doesn't mean anything if the game itself isn't something we love in some, I would hope at least. I know there's again, conflicting priorities there, but that would be my hope at least. So if you haven't played a game and you're like, I really want to experience this game, one of the beautiful things about today is there's so many different ways to experience the game. So if you're like, I'm never going to play this game, and I really, really want to, but I only am not playing it because of the price kind of thing, if there's a remake or something, I really highly encourage you to at least try that, play it that way, even if it's not the ideal way you want to. I think that's really important. If there's so many ways to play things on like original hardware with flash cards and SD cards. There's also straight up emulation, right? Experience the game first and foremost, and let that be like the center of like your love for the game, and don't focus too much on the physical copy. However, sometimes we do want that physical copy to be like as a physical reminder to us of like that experience that we had, right? We want to be able to look at that thing and be like, I love this game and I want to remember it and I want to keep reminding myself of it. And I think one of the easiest things you can really do is just like look at other merchandise for the game and see if you can find something that represents the game in some other way, a poster, a figure, or something along those lines. Just something that's there that can be that physical reminder that doesn't necessarily have to be the game itself. You can also support fan-made goods. I really love this approach because look, I'm somebody who held on to my GameCube games way too long and they're worth way too much money. Don't give me money for Cube of War. That's not a good use of your money. If I'm gonna sell it, but supporting fans of a series, things like that feels really good because I'm giving money to somebody who really cares about this franchise, rather than just someone like me who held on to Cube of War for too long. So, buying fan-made goods is really important. If you haven't been to the Kumoricon market, you should go do that, see if it's something there that interests you, kind of thing. And obviously, some franchises, especially when you get down to like Unex kind of stuff, right? You're not really going to find nearly as much of that kind of stuff. But you can also do like commission work too if you're interested as well. You can also give back to the community. I'm a big believer in like archiving stuff. I love uploading stuff to archive.org. So if you can find abandoned media and buy that instead and start uploading that onto the internet, that's a really good thing to do in my opinion. You can do like art books, there's strategy guides, Japanese strategy guides, man. They're like strategy guides / art books a lot of times. So if you pick them up, hey, you get that physical thing that's really cool to flip through if you ever want to. Also, please go to your library and scan it and put it on the internet if it's not on the internet yet, in my opinion. Also development materials. Come back to me. Development materials. Get out of there. Get out of there, game packaging. We're not ready for you yet. All right, well, you're just going to have to ignore that for right now. Development materials, though. I have bought development materials for, again, games that people don't really care that much about. If you're looking for Mario stuff or something like that, good luck on that. Somebody else is going to buy that and archive that, thankfully, mostly, hopefully. But if you can find development materials for games, I've bought like reference sheets that developers use when they're working on characters and stuff, and I've scanned those and upload those to the internet as well. Things like that. And maybe like only 10 people care about that, but me and those 10 people are like, yay, new art, awesome, I love this kind of thing. And last, sometimes you can cheat a little bit with game packaging. So a lot of game packaging has been archived at this point, but sometimes you find that one game that doesn't. And you can kind of use that to nudge yourself to believe that the price you're paying might be okay. I love Sin and Punishment. Does this one actually advance? I'm just going to touch it. Okay. I love Sin and Punishment for the Nintendo 64, and it is one of my favorite 64 games. If you don't know what this is like a treasure kind of on-rail shooter kind of thing. Yeah, it's on the Switch as well now, too. Come back. Oh, there it is. So yeah, it's like a really cool on-rail shooter. It's super accessible. It's on the Switch with the expansion pass. It's on like Wii U Virtual Console still, I think, although I don't know how great that version of the game is. Very, very cool. But it only ever got a physical release with the original 64 release in Japan in like 2000, and I always kind of wanted it. The box is really cool. And it was like $70 for a complete copy, which is not the worst, but it's still more than I want to spend. Again, $5 to $10 is my usual range. However, I found nobody had scanned the manual on the internet, or at least as far as I could tell. I searched for like a whole evening trying to find a scan of the manual. It's like, oh, there's a strategy guide that's scanned, but not the manual. So I use that as kind of a justification of like, okay, I'll spend the $70 and then bought it. And there's some cool stuff in here. I mean, it's a manual, but these like shadow forms of the main character in the like tutorial here, that's art that I didn't see anywhere else. As far as I can tell, that's exclusive to the manual. So like there's like cool stuff like that, and I've uploaded to archive.org, and like the Sin and Punishment fan base is big enough that like I think like 2,000 to 3,000 people have all gone and looked at it at this point. And so again, I paid the $70. It's still more than I wanted to, but I felt good about it because I was like, I gave back to the community. That money went to a better place than just this thing that's going to sit on my shelf. But also, it is now a thing that's going to sit on my shelf, so I feel okay about that. And I did play through it as well. It's like a very short game. Like if you haven't played Sin and Punishment and you have like the Nintendo 64 expansion pass, it's like you can finish it in like an afternoon. It's a great game, so I highly recommend it. So. Anyways, kind of the takeaways of today, I think more than anything, make sure you stay positive in what you're doing. Really focus on things that you can control. Like the reason I kind of push you away from those things I mentioned earlier is because a lot of them rely on things you can't control. And the more you can control, the more you kind of equalize your kind of shopping experience when you're out there purchasing games. And as things like, go up and down, you have places to kind of escape to like take your focus away if that market gets out of control kind of thing. The other thing I think is really important is just like really, first be passionate about games. That's very important, but also be respectful of other people who collect games. There's a lot of finger pointing of who might rise prices up and stuff like that. I'd like to think 99% of us who are buying video games buy them because we care about video games. And so like, don't poo-poo on people just because they have a different mindset than you when they're purchasing. I'm not saying you need to agree with everybody, but mostly people who are buying games are there because they're really passionate about it, and I think that's a great thing, and we don't want to drive people who are passionate about games away from it. And then also remember that they're just video games. I love video games. Maybe my entire life is based around video games in a way. It's healthy or not is a whole other question, but I love them and I adore them, and I spend pretty much all my free time thinking about them. But at the end of the day, whether or not each of us individually have the copy of the one game that we really care about, especially like retail release stuff, like it doesn't really matter. It's not going to change your life probably, and it's probably not going to change the world at all. Obviously, there's like some very edge cases, again, with preservation, where if you have something super, super special, please donate that. Video Game History Foundation, stuff like that. Archive.org is a great place to upload stuff too. But for the most part, these are just video games. And just try to remember that. And most importantly of everything, just do what makes you happy, man. Like, this is like a fun hobby to be in. So if you're stressing about it, do what you can to change your mindset of where you're at with it. Because if you're just worrying about it, I don't think that's like a fun hobby to be in. It's only going to drive you further and further away, and maybe in some ways ostracize you from the community a little bit, I feel like too. So anyways, that's it for my presentation. Again, if you didn't hear at the start, I'm from the website. Well, it's a website, but like all gaming content now, it's more or less just a YouTube channel. It's called One Controller Port. Again, I kind of focus on kind of obscure, underappreciated games. I do have cards up here if you're interested. And then I also have those Japan Retro Direct QR codes here as well. But yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. All right, well, I will let you go free then. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a good day, okay?